The Journey of Sir Alberich Lichten. Day 4, Part 1. Good morning, Journal. Today is the day that we make landfall, and I can tell everyone here is ready to get on with this adventure, including myself. I believe I will be planning on writing my story more so in chapters than in days once we reach our destination, as I'm sure there will be plenty to write once we reach land. I will spend the rest of my morning preparing, double and triple checking our supplies, going over strategies with the young ones that will actually listen, etc., etc. We are a mere hour before landfall, and that dullard Ordon has sprained his ankle. Had we not had several people trained in medicine on this trip, I would have called him a liar and a coward. But seeing the bruising on his ankle and not taking him to be a particularly good actor, well, let's just say I won't be able to heal as much as I might have liked during our first day of travel. He decided it a good idea to practice casting multiple spells at once, just to see if he could. Yesterday, he started with 2 firebolts, but that wasn't working. So he tried, what was it called? Misty Step and Firebolt? Nothing. He got fed up, and I made the mistake of telling him to take the rest of the day to research new ideas. And today, he decided to not only put himself in danger, but also waste some of his magical reserves. Well, I consider it a waste. He considered it vital research. In his research, he decided that he needed to use a spell with a faster casting time. So he chose... what was it? Feather Fall and Misty Step, I think they were called. Unfortunately, he got something mixed up. Misty stepped about 30 feet in the air and failed in casting Featherfall. Then, combining all of his genius and pride, he decided, oh, I can just land on my feet and be all right. And then there was a slam, there was a snap, and not a small amount of yelling in pain. If he wasn't so integral to the mission, I'd just leave him on the ship to think about his actions. While I was healing his ankle, Ordon would simply not stop complaining about the pain, how long the healing was taking, how long the trip was taking. I honestly couldn't stand listening to it all. So I may or may not have intentionally made a small mistake in healing him, and instead hurt him a fair deal more. He again continued whining, and I realized the real mistake I had made was making it so I would have to stay near him even longer. Eventually, he began complaining about his parents and his home life before college. He began going on and on and on and on about how mother and father would be dying to know that I was risking my life for some legend. Serves them right for always treating me like a baby. He continued on. Serves them right for this, serves them right for that. And the more he spoke, the more I realized why Ordon was so difficult to be around. It's simply because his parents treated him like such an important person that his ego outgrew their praise. It seems he's been spoiled all the way to the core, and there's very little chance of redemption for him. Quite the shame. But then again, maybe it's for the best. Maybe his particular set of values could come in handy for this quest. After all, it takes all kinds to find a legendary artifact. I realize now that I have yet to write anything about the actual artifact itself, and it's not a particularly well-known thing, so I suppose some context would be useful. The String of Infinity is quite literally a plain-looking string made of a ruby-red fiber. It is said that it was used to weave the tapestry of time, and that the string itself will persist through all of time, as will anything that is attached to it or made by it. Many people have gone searching for it as a source of immortality. Others simply wish to create undying creations. However, the smallest category of seekers, and by far the most dangerous, wish to combine the string with all of the other quote-unquote aspects of the universe. Unfortunately, I'm unsure what exactly those are. I just know about the String of Infinity, or Krizd Cathustra, which was originally named as such by the reptilian folk that owned the world before us quote-unquote soft skins took over, hence the near impossible pronunciation. I, of course, am simply here for the notoriety. If I can find this thing, then my name wouldn't just be synonymous with the military service and the murdering of savages. I would be a hero to everyone. We've just touched down on the coast. Every bit of glass on this ship has immediately fogged up due to the humidity. I can feel it with every breath I take. The air here is heavy and smells of heat, putrid flowers, and stagnant waters. Alberich says it smells like adventure. We are finishing gathering our supplies for the journey. A bedroll, a water skin, pittons, a shovel, some small blasting charges, rope, torches, and a matchbox, 3 healing potions, and an artifice stone that smells of my wife's favorite perfume. And, of course, the always trusty foray long sword and dark iron shield that I had called my weapons for several decades now. For the sake of the journal, I shall describe that the sword I use allows me an increased amount of mobility on the battlefield, specifically allowing me to disappear in a puff of smoke somewhere and appear in another location within approximately 30 feet of where I had left. It was also sharper than any sword I had ever wielded before, and just for good measure, I had it silvered a while back as well. As for the shield, well, I picked it up off the leader of a dragon cult during my early days as a colonel. It's got an incredibly sharp edge, an edge that never seems to dull. Not too dissimilar to myself. I don't know what it is made of, but I know it isn't just metal. To me, it weighs almost nothing, but if I were to bash someone with it, more often than not, they would simply go flying backwards. It was always quite fun during battles near cliff edges. We charted our course to reach a rumored temple that would take about half a day to reach. We debated for a while on whether that day should be today or tomorrow. Pietro and the Admiral advocated for waiting for tomorrow because if we got lost, we'd be in the jungles of Zalesif in the dark, and we'd likely never make it out. However, Ordon, Alberich, Adeline, and I were all suggesting to go now because, well, we were simply too excited to start the adventure proper. Not to mention, if we had to spend another night on the ship, I doubt any of us would stay sane. So, simple as, we set off. As the leader of the group, I decided our marching orders. It would be me and Adeline in the front, Ordon in the middle behind us, and Alberich next to Pietro bringing up the rear. It wasn't a subtle attempt to get them next to one another, but it seemed to work. The wildflowers of Zalesif are entirely unknown, so we made several stops so the two of them could hypothesize about how they could use them for various poisons and potions. It wasn't long before we were set upon by monsters. It took about an hour before we heard the sounds of rustling in the leaves above us. We all knew to err on the side of caution, so Ordon volunteered to fire a few ray of frost spells into the canopy, and Adeline shot a couple things into the treetops as well. She simply raised her hands, gathered a bit of greenish-blue energy in the palms, and they fired towards the canopy at ridiculous speeds. I have no idea what they were, but after a few casts from her and Ordon, several monstrosities fell to the ground. They were pale grey, hairless, hound-like creatures, though instead of paws they had 4 claw-like fingers that they used to cling to the branches, as well as long snouts full of serrated teeth. I'm unsure how they could even close their mouths without carving up the insides of their gums, but that is not for us to experiment with. Not long after that, an actual battle occurred. One that couldn't simply be finished by blindly firing cantrips into the trees. No, instead what attacked us was grotesque and deeply upsetting. There were 2 of them. Massive, hulking behemoths with torsos of loose flesh and extremities made of stone. Their heads were covered in small, pin-sized eyes, and their mouths were wide and could apparently be used like hands, which would help, seeing how they didn't have any hands. Instead, their arms were made of 3 huge cylinders of stone, all controlled and maneuvered by ligaments that stretched from their torsos and wrapped around each segment of the stone. The only difference between the two was one had red eyes and the other had blue. As surprising as it might sound, they caught us completely off guard. As we moved through the jungle, everything fell silent for a moment, and before we could even react, we heard the roar and the cracking of a tree being knocked in half and falling towards us. It was all we could do to not be crushed by the tree, but unfortunately we were unable to catch our footing before the beasts slammed their arms into our group. It had been a long time since I had felt the ache of battle, and even longer still since I felt the sensation of my ribs cracking. Ordon, Helrica, Pietro, and I were all sent flying backwards. Luckily for Adelaine, she was too short to be hit by the initial wild swings, but with all of us on our backs, the 2 beasts turned their attention to her. My usual method of blocking out pain was always to simply focus on what was in front of me and the position of my hands and weapons. I had practiced being ambushed and taking massive amounts of damage, as I had been in several uphill battles in my time as a soldier. Unfortunately, I had brought along several folks who simply hadn't the experience I did, so those that were hit stayed down for a bit in order to regain their senses. Adelaine had already drawn her scimitar by the time I stood and began my countercharge. The beasts roared in our faces. The sheer volume nearly deafened the both of us, but we charged forward undaunted. I drew my longsword and shield and clashed head-on with the red-eyed beast, while Adelaine deftly dodged and ducked and weaved her way around the Goliath's stone appendage. I called to rouse my other companions, and they were able to muster their will enough to stand and begin fighting. Ordon, for all his hubris, knows to not waste his magical reserves when his vision is blurry, and he doesn't have a clear shot, even against large enemies. So, he fired off his usual ray of frost at Blue Eyes, narrowly missing, adjusted himself, and now sure in his vision he fired several, I think they're called scorching beams. Something like that. Regardless, he shot several beams of fire in a jungle, and, luckily for everyone, they all found their targets against the hide of the awful blue-eyed creature. Meanwhile, Adelaine was managing to stick the beast here and there, though it didn't seem to be doing a whole lot of damage. Mostly just angered the things. Much to my dismay, and a thing I had gone over several times in our planning, Helrica ran to assist me in my battle. I told her 1,000,000 times that I was a seasoned veteran and could handle anything the woods could throw at me, at least until all other threats had been dealt with, and her other companions were safe. But she paid no heed to my requests, and wrapped a thorny vine around the arms of Red Eyes and immobilized one of his appendages. Now, I'm not so stupid to not take an opening purely on the grounds of making a point, so I'm not one for frivolous boasting. I will always take time to spin a tale about my heroic achievements, but the details of my combat skills I always said were pointless. But Pietro has insisted that I write down what I do in detail as they're the coolest goddamn moves ever, and to not talk about them is to not write your story, sir. So, the red-eyed monstrosity began to swing its free arm down on me, and I took my shield and jammed the side of it into the space where the tendons joined the stone segments together, essentially slicing the arm clean off at what would amount to their upper elbow. Then, with one swift flick of the wrist, I sliced between where the ligaments joined the leg segments together and toppled the beast over. Before it hit the ground, I had leapt through the air, and with the edge of the shield, I sliced half through the monster's neck as I dunged the sword into the thing's chest, and ripped down as hard as I could, cutting a good 3 feet down through the chest, and was immediately and regrettably covered in gore. While all this happened, Adelaine had gotten caught and pinned beneath one of the arms of Blue Eyes. With its mouth, it had grabbed a large rock off the ground next to it and spit it out at Ordon at a truly upsetting speed, and it slammed into his chest, knocking him to the ground once again. Pietro had charged after Blue Eyes with his short sword drawn, and as he ran, he coated the edge in some kind of purple venom, and he slashed once deep into the stomach of the creature. The area around the wound immediately began to turn necrotic and rot, and an awful smell filled the hot, humid air. The creature let out a scream that sounded like a mixture of pain and anger, and he bent over to chomp down on Pietro's head. Alberich shouted out in protest as we both dashed towards the monster, but before we got there, Adelaine, still pinned beneath his arm, managed to get her own arm free, and from her hand she shot a concentrated bolt of lightning into Blue Eye's stomach, where Pietro made his mark. It didn't kill the monster, but it seemed to harm it well enough to release her, and, well, regardless of how flexible this creature's mouth may be, it is incapable of biting someone's head off and screaming in pain at the same time. Pietro took this brief moment to stab the beast in the neck with his short sword, turning the neck a similar black, and the beast's cries eventually faded into the soft gurgling of a dying animal. We all gathered around and decided we should take a small rest in order to check our wounds, and because there were some truly fantastical plants scattered around. Namely, there were several flowers that looked to be made of a snowy white leather material that, when squeezed, would begin to drip a highly corrosive, acidic substance. Pietro took 2 small vials of the stuff, as the rest of us set up a small camp. Ordon laid some precautionary wards so we would not be ambushed again. Adelaine began making some stew for us all. Alberich was setting up the area to be more comfortable, and I administered as much healing as was necessary. Then, when all was set up, we went over strategy again. I told Alberich that the damage done to her companions would be far less if she had done to Blue Eyes what she did to the Red Eyes. She simply looked past me, as if she had something to say, but was unable to tell me at the moment. I will have a conversation with her tonight. Ordon requested the most amount of healing from me, which was understandable given how much he had been hurt in that fight, but I would have loved if he said please or thank you, even once. Again, I wasn't going to jeopardize the health and safety of my team for the sake of teaching a lesson, but it did irk me slightly. I'm very low on healing reserves now, and it's time to head out towards the temple once again. I will write again once we get there and bed down for the night. Hopefully, there will be very little to write about.